Pacific War, a conflict so massive that the oceans themselves seemed to tremble under the weight of steel and fire. The year was 1943, and Japan was still riding the momentum of its early victories. They had taken the Philippines, they dominated Southeast Asia, and above the vast blue Pacific, they held the skies with pride and confidence. The legendary Mitsubishi, a 6M0 fighter, a symbol of Japan's aerial supremacy, moved like a ghost through the clouds. It was light, precise, and terrifyingly graceful. In the hands of expert pilots trained for years, the Zero was a predator that rarely missed its prey. American pilots in those early days felt like they were flying into a hopeless storm. They were outmaneuvered, outclimbed, and outgunned by the Japanese. The Zero was the undefeated king of the skies. But history has a way of shifting when the underestimated rise with determination. Far from the front line, across the ocean, on Long Island, New York, a group of American engineers at Grumman Aviation studied the war like hawks. They acquired every scrap of intelligence they could. Reports from pilots who survived Zero attacks, damaged Japanese aircraft recovered from battlefields, even pieces washed up on shores. They discovered something critical. The Zero wasn't invincible. It was powerful because it was fragile. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, the slightest hit could turn it into a fireball. So the Americans decided, if Japan built a blade, they would create a hammer strong enough to shatter that blade. What they built was not just a fighter plane, it was a war beast, the Grumman F6F Hellcat. A machine designed with one goal, destroy the Zero in every way possible. Where the Zero danced, the Hellcat punched. Where the Zero evaded, the Hellcat chased. Where the Zero tried to climb, the Hellcat thundered upward faster. Its heart, a brutal Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp radial engine, over 2,000 horsepower of raw fury. It screamed through the sky like a storm unleashed. America wasn't just bringing a new airplane to the war. They were bringing a flying fortress of offense. 6 M2 Browning .50 caliber machine guns lined its wings, spitting over 3,400 rounds per minute. Every burst shredded the air like chainsaws of fire. A Zero needed to get close to kill, but a Hellcat could destroy you from hundreds of yards away. The Japanese pilots noticed something new. Their bullets bounced off American fighters, while one American bullet could tear their wings apart. And there was more. The U.S. Navy changed everything about air battles. They introduced advanced pilot training, teaching real combat tactics, dive and zoom attacks, defensive spirals, energy management, coordinated squadrons communicating flawlessly in the chaos. In Japan, things looked very different. Their best aces, the heroes of Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, and early battles, had been lost in the relentless grind of war. Replacing them was not easy. New pilots received rushed training, barely enough hours in the sky. They climbed into Zero cockpits filled with fear, not confidence. When these young men faced the Hellcat, the battle was already lost. In late 1943, the first clash between Hellcats and Zeros changed the war's rhythm. Japanese fighters dove and twisted, trying to pull the same maneuvers that once guaranteed them victory. But the Hellcat stayed behind them, gaining speed, leveling its guns. The sky lit with the spark of .50 caliber tracers. Zeros spiraled down, trailing black smoke, falling into the ocean that had once been their kingdom. Surviving Japanese pilots returned, shocked, reporting a new American fighter that could not be defeated in the ways they knew. Their commanders at first refused to believe it, but the truth arrived in waves of destruction. Hellcat squadrons tore through Japanese air defenses, carrier groups now pushing deep into areas once considered untouchable. The hunter had become the hunted. By early 1944, the Hellcat had established complete air superiority. American pilots walked onto the carrier deck with a confidence that was missing the previous year. They knew they were flying the best carrier-based fighter in the world. Every mission brought new victories. Every dogfight brought Japan one step closer to losing the skies. Then came Operation Hailstone, a mission that would alter the Pacific War forever. For Japan, Truk Lagoon was the beating heart of their navy, the place where fleets rested, refueled, and prepared for battle. But to America, it was the perfect trap. On February 16th, 1944, at dawn, the roar of American carriers broke the silence. Hundreds of Hellcats launched into the sky like a swarm of iron predators. What happened next was beyond anything Japan had ever imagined. In the span of a single day, more than 300 Japanese aircraft would be shot down. Hellcat pilots would slash the enemy air wings to pieces. Japan, the once proud commander of the Pacific, would be left stunned, with their air power evaporating into smoke and flames. This day would be remembered as the moment the Hellcat cemented its legend. But great victories do not come without great sacrifice. Every American pilot climbing into a Hellcat knew that each mission might be their last. Every flight deck goodbye might be final. They fought not just for dominance of the sky, but for their friends who never made it home. As the sun set on that historic day, the Pacific Ocean glowed with burning wreckage, a symbol that a new era had begun. Japan had lost more than planes. They had lost hope of ever regaining the skies. And the message was loud and clear. The Hellcat ruled now. February 17th, 1944. The sun had barely risen above the horizon, yet the sky around Truk Lagoon was already filled with the thunder of American Hellcats. The Japanese defenders tried to scramble whatever they had left. Zeros, float planes, bombers still being fueled on the ground. Many pilots ran from their barracks, still buttoning uniforms, their hearts pounding with panic, not courage. They expected a warning, they expected time to prepare, but the Hellcats gave them none. American fighters swooped down in numbers Japan had never seen before, wave after wave, squadron after squadron. The sky was drowning in roaring engines. The first group of Japanese planes took off, climbing desperately toward the fight. But as they rose, Hellcats were already diving on them from above, a position of total advantage. 50 caliber tracers slashed through the morning light. Zeros burst into flames before they even reached combat altitude. One Japanese pilot later wrote in his diary, "The sky had turned into a graveyard. We were lambs thrown before a pack of lions." On the ground, mechanics pushed aircraft toward the runway, screaming for pilots to take off. But Hellcats strafed the airfields mercilessly. Bombs ripped through hangars, fuel trucks detonated like volcanic eruptions, and pilots were killed before they touched their controls. America was not just destroying planes. They were destroying the very ability to fight. The U.S. Navy had found the perfect moment. Japan's air power at Truk was caught exposed and helpless. The Hellcats kept climbing, hunting for any aircraft trying to escape into clouds. Dogfights erupted over tropical waters, metal twisting and tearing in midair. Pilots maneuvered at the very edge of survival. A Zero managed to get behind a Hellcat, firing desperately. But the American pilot rolled, dropped his nose, dove with monstrous speed, and pulled up behind the Zero in seconds. The hunter became the hunted. A short burst. The Zero's tail shredded apart. It spiraled into the lagoon below, a streak of black smoke marking its final path. Everywhere, the same scene repeated. Japan's most experienced aviators were gone. Their replacements lacked training, lacked tactics, lacked hope. By noon, Japan had already lost more aircraft in one day than they could replace in months. Still, they fought on with whatever remained. Float planes rose from the water. Old reconnaissance aircraft tried to flee. Some pilots even chose to ram their attackers, desperation replacing strategy. But the Hellcat was merciless. The American carriers launched second and third attack waves, while battleships and cruisers fired from the sea, turning anchored ships into burning skeletons of steel. Massive explosions sent shock waves through the lagoon. Gun turrets flew like toys thrown by angry gods. Oil fires burned across the water, turning the ocean into a sea of flames. Japanese sailors dove into the burning waves, many never resurfacing. Their final vision, Hellcats circling overhead, dominant, untouchable. By late afternoon, radio transmissions from Truk had fallen silent. Smoke covered the sky like a funeral shroud. American pilots returned to their carriers, cockpits dusty with sweat and smoke. But they carried a look of disbelief. They had witnessed history. The United States Navy logged a staggering figure. Over 300 Japanese aircraft destroyed in a single day. Japan, once an empire that shocked the world at Pearl Harbor, was now the one shocked, broken, and losing the skies they once ruled. Hellcat pilots gathered on the flight decks, watching the sun sink into the Pacific, flames still rising from what was left of Truk Lagoon. They knew the truth. This victory was not the end of the war, but it was the end of Japan's air dominance. From that day forward, the Pacific belonged to the Hellcat, and every pilot who strapped into that steel predator carried the legacy of February 17, 1944. The day Japan learned what happens when the sky itself becomes your enemy.